So this is the iPhone 16, and it just recently launched this year. And also, the iPhone 13 came out 3 years ago. It was a very popular iPhone at the time. And in this episode, I want to break these down in detail to help you decide if you should consider upgrading your iPhone 13 at this point to a brand new iPhone 16. So what is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology. Let's talk first about the price. This is $799. If you get it unlocked and you don't sign up with a carrier, it's like $829. All in all, with taxes depending on your area, this is over $800 phone. Let's just put it that way. It's $800 plus tax. If you don't have a carrier, it might go over $9. With taxes, if you have a higher tax area. So this phone is not cheap by no means. And what does it come with? It comes with a 6.1 inch OLED display. This is of the 60 hertz variety, so this is not a 120 hertz ProMotion or 90 hertz. This also does have a 48 megapixel main sensor, which is a really nice sensor. It's very similar to the one that was first introduced on the iPhone 14 Pro. 8 gigabytes of RAM for the first time in a base model iPhone, Apple A18 inside, and inside the back here is a 3561 milliamp hour battery. So quick spec refresh for the iPhone 13 6.1 inch OLED display. On the back, we do have a 12 megapixel main sensor, so that's up 4 times on the iPhone 16. And we do have ourselves an ultra wide camera, but it's not quite as good at zooming on the main camera as this one. Also, we do have 4 gigabytes of RAM and an Apple A15 Bionic, which is plenty speedy, but that RAM is twice less, and a smaller 3240 milliamp hour battery. So you've seen that the size of the screen didn't really update, but the camera got better, the RAM got better, the CPU, and the batteries. All right, so should you upgrade to the iPhone 16 when it comes to the body and the build of this phone? And the answer depends on what do you prefer in terms of the build quality, because the back of the iPhone 13 does have a classy looking glass back. This one is a color infused glass back, which is more of a matte texture, a frosted kind of texture, but it definitely feels a little bit smoother. I think it feels slipperier, honestly, but it also feels, I would say, definitely like you're not going to get as many fingerprints, which is what I've noticed. I personally really prefer the iPhone 16's design because it just has a lighter, like just a less dirty kind of feel. This one gets really, and when I say dirty, I don't mean your phone is like gross. I just mean that you can get fingerprints all over this easily, oils on your finger pick up on this glass back. And while that does provide some grip, this just feels nicer in the hand. It also feels smoother in the edges over the 13. So kind of like right here, the corners, the glass right here just feels smoother at the edge. So to me, ergonomically, this is actually the most nice iPhone in the lineup right now. And this one, while it still has a nice classy feel to it, the iPhone 13, it's a little less comfortable in the hand. It also weighs 174 grams versus 170. In addition to that, the iPhone 13 surprisingly is slightly thinner, only by 0.1 millimeter. That's probably due to the cameras, but essentially it's exactly the same thickness. Just the 13 just feels like just a little bit chunkier, a little bit heavier of a phone. It's just very minor, but these little minor things add up to make a more ergonomic phone. So I think you will like this upgrade to the iPhone 16 if you're coming from a 13 from that perspective. All right, so looks wise, I will say that the iPhone 16 is going to be maybe for some, maybe for not others. So I think personally, some people are not a fan of these vertical cameras. Some think it looks exactly like other phones on the market. Some people like the unique diagonal look of the iPhone 13 over here, and some people don't like either. But really, at the end of the day, it's really subjective on design. But I will say that I do think, personally, for my personal take, I like the iPhone 16s, not because it's the newer phone, but because the cameras actually line up straight down with the body of the phone. I think that looks more symmetrical. I think this just looks odd. Like they literally just took... I always thought this looked odd, but that's just my opinion. Your opinion may differ because they just basically took it and put it. It just doesn't match the phone. It looks out of place, in my opinion. I really prefer when cameras line up uniformly with the body. It looks more vertical, just like the phone is vertical, more symmetrical. So personally, I like the design on the iPhone 16 more. But it's not like a massive upgrade in design to me. It's just refined, more polished. I do like how the bezels look thinner. And also, I do like the dynamic island feature set. The notch is kind of more out of the way, but it's even if you look at the dynamic island, it's smaller than that notch. That notch is deeper and looks bigger. So from a looks perspective, you'll definitely notice you have the newer phone with the dynamic island, although it's kind of hard to tell between a 14 Pro all the way up until now from the front. This kind of feels like a 15 Pro in weight though, and overall just kind of like the feel is like a cheaper version of a iPhone 15 Pro. That's what the 16 feels like to me, but design is subjective. I still say that you're getting a nice upgrade in design in most areas. They definitely refined it and polished what the 13 had to offer. So from a display perspective, we have OLED panels on both of these, and you can see both do a phenomenal job in this area of the phone. They're both XDR, HDR10, both have Dolby Vision. The iPhone 13 gets 800 nits, the 16 1000 nits. That's not massively different, but it definitely helps a little bit. Outdoors though, the 16 can hit approximately 2000 nits of brightness versus only 1200 here on the iPhone 13. So outdoors, the 16 will shine. But generally, I think the display elements are going to come down to, do you want a brighter display? Because that's where the iPhone 16 becomes worth it. It's just easier to see outdoors. So if you're on the go a lot, you're in sunny conditions, that's where the iPhone 16 really pulls ahead of the 13. Its bezels are reduced, but they're not as drastic as, say, like a 16 Pro or a 16 Pro Max. You got to look a little closer. It's not drastically so here. And also the sharpness is basically identical, 460 pixels per inch, and they both have 19:9 aspect ratios, which essentially means that the width of these aspect ratios lend to a more easy to read experience versus a more narrow 20:9 aspect ratio screen that some other smartphones employ. But at the end of the day, you're really just kind of looking at two pretty decently compact phones with the same density, same refresh, with a little bit more brightness and a dynamic island. So those are the choices to make here. Would I do the upgrade for this? Probably if I was looking mostly at a display upgrade, I'm going Pro. That's going to be the bigger display upgrade. So I don't think this is the main reason to upgrade, but the extra brightness could be useful to you. In addition, if you've been wanting a dynamic island, this is going to be the best like base model iPhone since the dynamic island got introduced, because on the 14 Pro, it was like over $1,000. Now you can get it on the base model, and this phone is still nicer, I say, than a base 14 Pro. All right, so when it comes to software, iOS 18.0.1 is available for this phone now. In addition to that, 18.1 is coming soon, probably end of October or sometime in this month, maybe November if it gets pushed back. At the end of the day, the iPhone 16 is a definite win for software because it has that support for Apple Intelligence and the 8 gigs of RAM. Those two elements are now going to make this software run more smooth day to day. It also ensures longer software support and better performance over the long term. So yeah, I think for software, this is definitely one area to upgrade. It's not because it's going to change your experience too much. I mean, we're on iOS 18 over here as well. You can run it just fine. But when Apple Intelligence does launch, this phone's going to feel like a lighter version of that software. Not that that's a bad thing. It still does a lot of functions that you'll want from a smartphone to do. But at the end of the day, that 4 gigs of RAM, this phone actually performs a little worse than it did when it first came out, in my opinion. This phone is going to be outdated in a couple of years. So if you're keeping your phone a long time, I do think upgrading for software support and future features is a major go for the iPhone 16. But again, it's not like they're not like they're just starting. They're not like super refined just yet. So you could actually make it another year easily with the 13. If you want to wait for like the 17 Air or something like that, you could definitely wait it out a bit on the iPhone 13. But if you want a phone now, this is one of the strong suits of going to a 16, I would say. Performance-wise, this is another major area to upgrade. The iPhone 16 benchmarks like a Pro iPhone. So it's kind of like, usually the base models are getting these older CPUs lately, and they're just not as fast. But that's not the case anymore. The iPhone 16 has a massive leap in performance, and you're basically getting a Pro iPhone without the Pro Motion display. That's how good the performance is on these latest base models. So this is an enticing year for base models because of the performance area. It's just going to be better in gaming, launching apps faster. It's going to have better benchmarks. It's going to perform better, render videos faster. It's going to do basically everything faster than your iPhone 13, which is expected as a new phone, but it's like drastically faster. So if we go to the Geekbench scores here, take a look at some of my results in my history, you'll see over 1,000 points on that single core and over 2,000 on that multi-core. That adds up day to day. Believe me, that does. That is going to add up to a much more fluid everyday experience on the iPhone 16. So performance is another area that I would say it's a go. Definitely do the upgrade if it's something you're thinking about. You're definitely going to really win out when it comes to performance. That's one of the strong upgrades to the iPhone 16. When it comes to battery life, the iPhone 13 was always a really good phone in this area of battery life. However, I do think that the iPhone 16 is doing a bit better, and it's kind of like this year of the iPhone 13 when the phone was really strong. So all the 13 models were strong and all the 16 iPhone models are strong. The 14s weren't the strongest, neither were the 15s. Those were decent, but 14s were the worst in the past few years. This is good again. This is like iPhone 13 good again. So I think if you are looking for that battery upgrade, I think this is a solid choice. It's not going to be insanely better, but it's definitely better from what I've seen so far versus the Apple iPhone 13. It's not like life-changing though. Like the life-changing battery upgrade from this is the Pro and Pro Max. But I think it's a go if you're looking for good battery life. This is not going to be a deterring factor. It's actually really good. And, you know, even the base model 16 Plus is really good as well. So if you want to go Plus, you can consider that too. But we're talking about the base model 16. This is definitely worth it for battery life. When it comes to the audio performance, there is literally no difference here. Both of them have basically the same loudness. The fullness is about the same. I have not seen any real differences in this area. So I would not do an upgrade to get so much better audio from the speakers and stuff like that. There's not a massive disparity here. However, the 16 does have a better modem inside, so it does actually have better signal strength and is going to perform better in mobile data, which if you're using your mobile data or you're out a lot and you're not using home Wi-Fi and things of that sort, this phone will be a better phone as a phone than the iPhone 13. And that's because of the improved Qualcomm X75 modem in here versus the older Qualcomm modem in the iPhone 13. So that's a thing that people don't think about, but it's actually better on the iPhone 16. Let's talk about the cameras. So we talked about the visual aspects earlier, but let's actually talk about the performance and what you're going to get here. So if you do want to do the upgrade, first time, I think it's the macro mode coming to the base model. So it's like having a pro camera now with the macro mode. That's something you could achieve on the iPhone 13, but you would need to use the ultra wide to get a macro photo. It's possible, but it's nothing like having the new 16. You could see a dedicated macro mode is going to give you upgraded results. And even if I try harder, I know I was being a little sloppy there. You can see that's just not going to produce the same results as a dedicated macro mode on the iPhone. So that's a big upgrade for you right there. In addition, you will have more zoom, like a lot more zoom, 2x, 10x. And while 10x is still digital, up until about 5, it still performs similar to the 13. You still have more zoom than the 13. In addition, video gets better. We also have cinematic modes on both, and we have spatial video options for the iPhone 16. So overall, I would say the 16 is more closer to a Pro-like phone than the iPhone 13, which is not for everybody, but it's definitely a nice upgrade. On the front-facing cameras, we don't see massive changes. We're still on 12 megapixel, but again, every version is getting a little bit better with the processing. It just doesn't look all that different. So I probably wouldn't do the upgrade just for the front-facing camera. Just doesn't do it for me. It's not enough. And one thing I really liked about the 13 is that the photos are really crisp for just like the main sensor and kind of like the ultra wide. They were just super good. You know, you didn't have to know how to use a camera that much. I do feel like the 16 is a slightly more pro-like experience. Not that the 13 is not easy to use, but the iPhone 16, you might get some of this like switching between the macro mode sometimes, and it might annoy you sometimes, but still overall the results are just improved. So I would pick this over the 13 for the camera for sure. Also, if we go to the camera control button, I don't think all these features up here, I think those are kind of gimmicky. They're a little bit slow and stuff like that, but pulling this out and not missing a moment, that's a big deal. I think like if you're trying to catch a moment, hold this down or hold it down again to record, you might not miss that moment. That's a pretty cool feature to have because you just be anywhere. Make sure you hold this here, hold that down, get the video, and you got it. So like that's a pretty nice use factor, especially if you're not trying to miss any memories. That could be a nice new addition for your camera experience. So camera wise, I do think the upgrades are pretty good here. I wouldn't say they're like life changing, but they're pretty good upgrades. So it's justifiable, I would say, to do this for the camera upgrade. But if you really want the best cameras on an iPhone, you got to go Pro or Pro Max. Now, phone call quality has been improved due to the Qualcomm X75 modem. Well, I should say reception strength, but phone call quality has been a little bit better as well. For me, it just sounds a little better. Overall, this is a nice little upgrade. You also have emergency SOS on here. You also have satellite, text messaging on this phone. That's a major, major win for this phone. It can be life-saving, actually, on the iPhone 16. So 13 doesn't have that. So that's a massive upgrade. The one that you don't think about, you don't use that feature that much, but if you need it, it could be a life-changing feature. One of the last little minor details I want to mention is the action button and the SIM card slot. The SIM card slot goes away from the 13, so you have to go eSIM, and some people call that a deal breaker. It's not that difficult, though, once you get the hang of it. Still, it is a deal breaker for a lot who want to switch phones a lot. The class and silent switch is again going to be subjective. I personally think this is an upgrade to get the action button though, because this programmable button allows you to put what you want on your button versus like it always being the same boring button. While some people like that simple, boring, classic button, you can just leave it on silent mode if you want it classic. So I think that's an upgrade as well. The SIM card, that is going to be preference, but I do say that the SIM card is definitely, for some, going to be a downgrade going to eSIM. For some, they're going to like it that they don't have to worry about that anymore. Wrapping it up here, though, you thought Apple was going with no buttons, and now there's more buttons than ever on these latest iPhones. In conclusion, if you're considering doing an upgrade from a 13 to the 16, I think after analyzing both of these for you here, it comes down to, do you want longer software support, better performance, 8 gigs of RAM, Apple Intelligence, and you want action button, camera capture button, dynamic island, and improved cameras? There's a lot of upgrades. I just mentioned most of them. There is a lot, and I think it's justifiable, especially if you get a discount with a trade-in with the iPhone 13. However, if you're looking for, I would say, a radical change in iPhone design, I don't think this is it still. This is an improvement year over year and a polished version of a 13 with multiple Pro-like features, but this is still not a drastic, radical change to the overall experience. So if you're looking for that, this is not it. But if you're looking for a better version of the 13, like 3 times better than the 13, do the upgrade. You're going to be happy. I hope that helped. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I will catch you all in the very next episode. Thank you very much for watching. Nick here. Be sure to be well. And peace.